It is common for indie developers to create a system or mechanic in their games that is very much a testing of the water. It results in it often feeling rough around the edges or even unpolished. It can cause critics and the consumer to not appreciate a game and misunderstand what it is attempting to achieve. Creating something new and unique is never going to be perfect first time around, but it can lead to great things later on. Uncanny Valley is a survival horror game developed and published by a small indie developer called Cowardly Creations. It released April 23, 2015 on Steam for Windows. Despite getting a small amount of coverage from various video game websites and YouTubers, Uncanny Valley has remained a rather unknown and unappreciated title. You take on the role of Tom. It is his first day at his new job as a security guard at the shutdown research facility called Melior. The facility is located in a remote area covered in snow. The only neighbouring buildings are the generator house and the employee apartments. The only others at the facility are Buck, a lazy, overweight security guard who does the day shift, and Eve, the cleaner of the apartments. Tom suffers from nightmares and night terrors every time he sleeps. The nightmares generally consist of him being hunted by shadow people. Time away from the city and a new job seemed like just what Tom needs. What kind of research was being conducted at the facility? Why was it shut down? What is causing Tom to have such nightmares? The answers to these questions are just in reach. Finding them, however, may lead to consequences. Consequences you are not prepared to face. The plot to Uncanny Valley is an interesting one. It is told in a way that is unusual for a video game. Essentially, you have three different stories that all become connected into one big plot. You have Tom's nightmares, the history of the facility, and the present day. The first half of the game is mostly piecing together Tom's nightmares and the facility's history. The latter half focuses more on the present day events. It requires multiple playthroughs to get the entire story from beginning to end. As you play the game, the choices that you make can change what part of the story is told to you. The plot itself is well written and has good depth to it. I personally love piecing everything together. I love how making different choices can change how the story of Tom's nightmares is presented, but also how the game ends. How the story is told, however, can be either its highlight or its bane. This form of storytelling is certainly not something that everyone will enjoy. This includes having to play through the game multiple times to receive it in full. The other issue with the plot is its major plot twist. The dialogue literally gives it away well before the event takes place. This giveaway does lessen the impact of it, but not all is ruined because of it. Overall, it is an enjoyable story to piece together and experience. Much like its plot, the first half of the game is very different to the latter half. The first half of the game takes place around the main part of the facility and its surroundings. It takes place over a total of up to 5 days, sometimes less depending on your actions. During this time you are introduced to the main characters, Tom's nightmares, and through investigating the facility, its history. It is through your actions during this half of the game that ultimately determines what ending you are going to receive, assuming you survive. There would be one thing I would criticise about this part of the game. That would be that some of the actions required to get certain endings are quite out of the box thinking. This is due to the actions being very out of character for Tom's personality. You would never think he would be capable of doing some of the things needed for specific endings. Once you are past the first half of the game, it turns into something very different. It turns from a mystery into pure survival horror, very often thrown in unexpectedly. I feel that it is really well designed, just how suddenly you are put into a life-threatening situation. It really gets you into a panic as you realise just how much trouble you are in. It is a wonderful switch of gameplay that caught me off guard. Your actions up until this point also determine how you are placed into this situation of life or death. In order to survive, you will have to run and hide from enemies. You can attempt to kill them, assuming you have found a gun, but don't expect it to be very effective. Using the gun is really only a very last resort, and ammunition is in very short supply. As enemies attack you, they inflict certain injuries to you, such as breaking your arm or leg, a bleeding wound to your torso, or injuring your face. Each of these injuries will hinder you in some way. For instance, a broken leg will prevent you from running, while a bleeding wound allows you to be tracked easier. The injuries can be treated using medical supplies, but they are very scarce. While the second half of the game may be a big difference from the first, it is survival horror done right. To survive, you must be quick, and and clever. While suddenly being thrown into the lion's den may not be to everyone's appeal, it is extremely effective at putting you into an absolute panic. After 30 minutes of safety, you suddenly feel very vulnerable. There is, however, one major issue with this design. The issue is that it is effective the first time you play it, but not on multiple playthroughs, as you know it is coming. With that said, it is still good old-fashioned survival horror every time. I enjoy the gameplay of Uncanny Valley, even with its major shifts halfway through. It is, however, something that I feel will only appeal to a very niche audience. It is something that you would need to play with a very open mind. While there are faults to be found with most of Uncanny Valley's features and mechanics, there's one thing done brilliantly: the atmosphere. The first half of the game is a brilliant build-up of pure atmospheric dread. You know something is going to happen, and it makes you stew in that sensation for quite some time. As each day passes throughout the first half of the game, things begin to become darker and stranger. Unusual occurrences happen throughout the facility, and the nightmares each night intensify. You know all of this is going to lead to something. You just don't know what, when, or how. That is until it is already upon you. Even when the build-up is over and everything goes to hell, the atmosphere does not dwindle. Instead, it intensifies even further. This is helped by the amazing atmospheric soundtrack that fits perfect with every scenario. Whether that is being chased by an enemy, surviving, or meeting your gruesome end, the soundtrack fits it perfectly. There are few games out there that can say they have achieved atmospheric perfection, but Uncanny Valley is one of them. Uncanny Valley is a game that has the characteristics of a genius's mind. It is intelligent, unpredictable, and borderline insane. It is far from being a perfect game mechanically, but what it attempts to do is simply brilliant. Its consequence system does require a lot of work, but for a first time attempt, I appreciate it. It is a game that I feel will only appeal to a niche audience, or those who are open-minded to attempting new and unusual games. It isn't a game that will scare you with jump scares, but with the atmosphere. It has a great story, but its telling would not be to everyone's appeal. Its halfway curveball of gameplay too would be off-putting to a lot of players, as its gameplay does feel like two different games in one. I enjoyed it and feel that both gameplay styles were done relatively well. It is a wonderful little title. It is very dependent on the player's taste in video games and storytelling as to whether they will enjoy it or not. If you are open to trying something very different, unusual, and imperfect, then this may be the horror title you were looking for. Uncanny Valley is a game that I feel if done again, or a sequel was to be made, it would be something utterly amazing. Sadly, that is something that is looking grim in the possibility of happening. As of writing this, August 22nd, 2016, the developer's site is up for sale. The game failed to reach its funding goal of $8,000 on Indiegogo, and has not sold well from its release over a year ago. On the Steam forums, when answering the community's questions to there being a sequel, the developer stated, "We would love to make a sequel or DLC. It will be determined by how the console version sells, and it needs to sell well." I've been unable to find any information on a release for a console version of the game. It may be possible that the console version was never completed. Between the lack of a promised console version, to my knowledge, and the sale of their site, it would seem the lights of this developer have been turned off. While we may never see a sequel or remastered version to Uncanny Valley, the seeds of its consequence system have been sown. Perhaps, sometime in the future, another developer will attempt to use such a system, and hopefully polish, refine, and use it the way it always supposed to be. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, take care and have fun.